print and digital. The implication is that duplication is one of the hardest things to control when you try and put two different data sets together. And if we don't get that right, then everything that follows that we do with our multimedia data set is compromised. Now, the objectives of much of what I'm going to say is to create, evaluate, and price cross-platform advertising packages. Because media houses are selling content, they want to be able to put that together as a package and sell it at a profitable price across the media groups. And we want to be able to do that using standard media planning metrics: gross reach, net reach, and frequency distribution. So the order of the presentation is a section on why duplication control between the media types is the critical factor. I'll say just a few words on the limitations of data fusion as a technique for controlling duplication when you're putting two data sets together, and why single source data is essential, and how we get this single source in Sweden, which is much of my case history, through the Orvesto Consumer Survey, which is the national readership survey in Sweden. Then how we actually go on and integrate the print data and the digital data using data expansion models and calibration techniques, which are different from data fusion. And how we improve OTS comparability between print and digital. It's one thing to put two surveys together, but the metrics that you're using for print are very different in how they're derived and what they mean from what we get from digital data. And then I want to go on and think about how you build advertising packages between the two data sets, print and digital. And the dynamics of the two media are very different, and when you're building, many things have to be taken into account in these packages, and I will try and explain what is different about putting the two together as opposed to serving each individually. So let's take a look at duplication. And we're going to do so from a large-scale, high-response, single-source survey. And this is Orvesto Consumer in Sweden, 45,000 sample annually. If you just think about three media overlapping, you've got four circles in the middle, or shapes in the middle, each of which is duplication, triplication, quadruplication, and so on. But it's not quite as simple as just the three or four, because you have to make sure that the structure within each of those remains a good random structure in terms of the light, medium, heavy usage of each of the media, because if you don't get that right, things change rather a lot in the way that your results are delivered. So what I've done is simply to take the three media, radio, television, and group them into light, medium, and heavy groups. So the heavy radio group, coupled with light television and light internet, has a very different way, the brown, of very different attitudes and interests. On the left-hand side, you can see that people who are interested in new technology in everyday life, or people interested in hair care, or people interested in illness, these are target groups. There's a very different reach involved between the heavy brown, which is the radio, the light blue, which is the heavy TV, and the pink, which is the heavy internet. So the structures are very different, and you've got to keep control of those structures when you put data together. Now, very quickly, if you use data fusion, what happens in data fusion is that you have two sets of samples of people, and you match them together. It's a bit like a marriage situation. You try and find people who match on certain interests and so on. So, but the problem is that if you try and control too closely by trying to say these are like television viewers of this characteristic with another set on the other side, you run out of sample. You can't break the samples down and match them with any. You can match a few, but not right the way through your sample. So the data fusion breaks down somewhat when you try to do that. There's no control over at the individual level. So you might be able to do light, medium, and heavy as a control, but if you try to do it title by title on duplication or media group by station or radio station, then there's quite a problem. And this is compounded once you use more than one data integration. So you start with TV and print. You add radio in. So you've now got 3 sets to control. You add internet in, internet mobile in. You've now got 4 and 5 sets to control duplication. And so it becomes extremely difficult to control these. And there's a 4th issue that you have to be careful about. TV is based on a Holmes panel. And the behaviour in a Holmes panel is not independent. It is dependent upon the family situation of viewing. If you try and match people from another sample, where it's not a home sample, it's an individual sample, then there's an independence of behaviour, and you don't know their dependencies within their home. So it becomes quite difficult to control for that. We're going to describe another form of integration, which is called virtual diary integration. Now, this keeps good control over the duplication level at the individual level, individual vehicle level. And for multimedia groups, you can simply build on other groups and still keep control of the duplication, and it avoids the homes to individuals matching as well. So it has 3 underlying advantages which we want to make use of. In the virtual diary creation process, instead of donating information from one respondent to another respondent, we just use the original respondent in the host survey and expand his information. We may just know his frequency of information of visiting each site. And we expand that information and make it look as if he had completed 1 week of diary, or even, as it were, he'd been on a panel for a week. So we don't match anybody, we don't take 2 people and put them together. We work on one person and expand the information we have about him. And we do it in such a way that the sum of all individual diary records are calibrated to match the reach levels from each site found by the panel or currency information. So the end result is that the data in the host survey is matching the data in the currency survey as if the 2 had been put together, but they were just expanded. It's a modelling technique. And the point is that nobody who does not claim to visit a site is allowed to have a diary. The single source duplication patterns are therefore actually undisturbed. So, we work in Sweden with Ovesto Consumer, which is, as I said, the NRS. It's conducted by TNS in Sweden. It's a self-completion 48-page unit, and it covers radio, print, TV, internet, cinema, direct mail, plus a lot of attitudinal and interest data and market data. So it's a full TGI survey. It's done by mail and it's self-completion. It's 48 pages, so it's quite a lot of information collected. And it's a good random sample without any clustering. And it has some oversampling in urban areas for local press, particularly. And it has still, in this day and age, a 45% response rate. Now, what we collect about the media, is very similar in all of the media groups. And it's very simple in all of the media groups. So we take, here's a print example, and we have a frequency scale, perfectly normal frequency scale. The Swedes actually don't use recency, so there's no grade in last period. They just use the frequency. The reason that they do that is that they have a lot of different issue periods, so it's very difficult to describe an issue period when it appears 6 or 11 times a year. We do the same for the internet duplication control. We do the same for radio, we do the same for television, but here's the internet one. We take the frequency, the number of days per week that they visit each site. It's a claim, it's a recall claim. And we also ask about mobile sites. So at the moment we're covering over 200 websites and also a lot of sub-sites. And the mobile sites only says 16, but that was only whenever I did this a few months ago. It's now well over 80 and it's growing all the time. There's a second set of information that we need in order to enable us to do the expansion model. Frequency is the one thing by channel, but the second thing is we need to know when people are using the internet. So we need to be able to control, when we make the model, the day-part allocations of information. And we do this by this set of information that simply asks for weekday, weekend, whether they are always, sometimes, or never visiting the internet at this time. So here's our basic structure. We have in the middle the NRS that I'm talking about, TGI. We call that the host survey. It has all the single source information about the cross-duplication of radio, television, internet, and print. We then bring the control data from the currencies. So we have on the top right, we have the television currency. On the bottom right, we have the radio currency. And then we have a panel for web and mobile. And then we have Augusta Day, which is the daily readership of newspapers. Not the frequency of producing an average issue, but a day-by-day readership of newspapers. So all of these things are then brought in to the NRS. So in the internet site, we've got the single source site duplication, we've got page views coming from the internet panel, which is 18,000, and that's tracking the PC. And then we've got a sub-panel, which is also now including apps covering the mobile browser activity. And that data is calibrated to site-centric data in terms of gross hits, gross page views. So that's bringing in the site-centric measurement as well. Now when we integrate, we don't just look at the overall sample, but we break the NRS sample down into perhaps 20, 30 subgroups, which are predictive of the way people use media. So it will be different for radio, it will be different for internet, it will be different for television. And within each of those cells, we, well, first I will tell you that the recall claims between the panel and the recall and the panel are actually in Sweden very close. In other countries, they're often not so close, but in Sweden we seem, for some reason, to get very close relationships between the panel recall levels, the panel measurement levels, and the recall claims that are in the NRS. So this is how we would create the diary. We start with the week. So we would have, let's say, 10,000 or 100,000 people claim to be viewing in the week. And then we have also our daily information because we know the frequency, so you can calculate an average day. But then when we look at the currency, we find that it's a little bit below. So we calibrate, that means we adjust. So you randomly throw some people out to bring it down. Or if it's above, then you go upwards to the next frequency group. So visiting in the last month, we choose some of those people to fill our cells so that we met with control